The clay was cold and thick under his fingers. John Brennan worked the daub into the lattice as the first snow of winter began to fall.
A beaver dam, not a home. That thing will crack before Christmas, Brennan.
You hear that, John? Your mud pie's gonna spill all over the mountain.
John didn't look up. He pressed the clay deeper into the weave.
Caleb, mark my words. That man's dug his own grave with muck and sticks.
They don't know what this wall can do. They've never seen it hold.
He lit the lantern inside, and the small window glowed like a beacon against the cold. Ranger took his post at the threshold, ears pricked as if he knew what was coming. The mockery hung in the air, but the cabin stood complete. The question now was which would break first, the mud or the men. A few months earlier, John Brennan had owned a farm. Not a wall of mud and sticks. The bank took the land, the lumber, everything but the clothes on his back.
Granddad always said, green sticks and good clay, that's all a man needs to keep out the cold.
He dug clay from the creek bed and mixed it with straw until it held like stiff dough. The frame rose like a skeleton. Upright posts with woven sticks, laced tight as a basket.
Aiming to live in a basket, Brennan, or just planning to catch rabbits?
No sawmill. What's next? A dirt floor.
Let them laugh. This old way has kept families alive for 1,000 winters.
By the time the first snow fell, the wall was sealed and the fire laid inside. The only thing lower than his cabin was the opinion of the town. The first killing frost of the season came that night. Inside, John fed a few sticks to the stove. The heat settled into the clay like warmth into old bone.
Smooth, solid. Not a whisper of cold beneath his palm.
Ranger stretched out on the floor, his coat dry and his breathing slow. In Amos Carter's cabin, the night was a different thing entirely.
Winds cutting through every seam. Can't you feel that? Stuff the rags deeper.
The wind fingered the gaps between the logs, and the candle flame dipped and shuddered in the cold.
He looked out at the moon and felt the silence of a space that lost no heat.
The frost climbed the window glass, but the room stayed warm. In their cracking log boxes, the town shivered in the dark, not knowing the answer to the cold, stood at the far end of the lane. Over the next 3 days, the frost sank deeper into the valley, and the cold stopped being a weather. It became a weight. In Amos Carter's cabin, a green log cried out in the night, splitting open with the sound of a rifle shot. By morning, a crack as wide as a thumb ran the length of the wall, daylight slicing through like a cold blade.
A little split means nothing. I've built cabins my whole life. We'll pack it with oakum and forget it.
John ran his hand over the clay, hard as fired brick. Not a single hairline crack.
John Brennan? I'd like to see this wall of yours, if you'll allow it.
John opened the door. The warm air rushed out and met her face, a heat she hadn't felt in her own home all week.
She stepped inside and felt the heat settle around her like a blanket. No draft, no whistle, just still, heavy warmth. It's still. No draft at all. How?
Martha left without another word, but Amos saw her from his frozen porch. He turned his back and went inside, slamming the door. Then the real cold rolled down from the mountains, a front so bitter the pines groaned in the night. Inside, John fed the stove a handful of sticks. The daubed walls threw the heat back into the room like a slow ember. A child's fingers went white with frostnip in the Carter house, and Martha Norris was called to bring her salves and rags. Amos stuffed strips of old blanket into the widening crack, but the wind still whistled through like a needle threading cloth.
Amos, that crack's letting in death. I've got clay mixed. Let me pack it for you.
Keep your mud off my walls. I am not burying my family in a dirt hut.
The crack stayed open, and the frost painted a white seam across the inside wall.
Stubborn to the bone, but the cold won't wait.
That night, the temperature plunged further. The wind screamed, and the settlement held its breath. In the morning, the story was written on every face, shivering, hollow-eyed, and still too proud to ask. Caleb Marsh peeled away from Amos's porch and trudged toward the only warm window on the lane.
John, You in there! My wall's crack has spread 3 feet. My wife's got the baby wrapped in every blanket we own.
I've got clay mixed, buckets by the trough. Come.
John filled a small pail with the mud and straw mixture and pressed it into Caleb's hands. Caleb packed it into the gap from the inside, forcing the freezing air back where it came from.
The wind shut up like a slapped door. In 10 minutes, the room held the heat.
By noon, the general store had sold its last blanket, and the merchant held up empty hands.
Our woodpile's low. The mill can't run frozen. Have any of you thought what happens if this cold holds?
Caleb stood among them, saying nothing. But inside his coat, he was warm for the first time in a week. That afternoon, the old Hargrove roof gave way, a deep crack that echoed across the lane. John arrived with green branches and rope, lashing a temporary brace beneath the broken rafters.
Weave some green sticks here, then pack clay. It'll hold till spring.
More twigs and mud. You'll trap the Hargroves in a grave of dirt.
Your cabin's held together with rags, Amos. At least his stands.
Stands. It's a mud heap. One good thaw and it'll slide off the hill.
John said nothing. He simply bent a green branch into the frame and let the silence do the talking. The lane split into 2 camps, those who saw hope in the weave and those who still called it mud.
We have children with frostbite and a cabin that's warm. How much more proof do you need?
By dark, the 2 camps stood glaring, and the cold kept pressing like a tightening fist. The next morning, the sky broke open. A warm wind ran down the valley, and icicles began to drip.
See? Winter's breaking, and that mud hull? It'll crack as soon as the ground swells.
But by dusk, the wind swung back hard. The meltwater froze into a sheet of glass, and the logs began to shriek. Thin cracks became open wounds. 3 families dragged bedding into the store, their homes unlivable.
He ran his hand over the clay. Hair-thin lines, nothing more. The wall had drunk almost no water.
The daubed walls had cured to stone, and the frost only made them harder.
Look at it. The only house on the lane that didn't crack open.
Amos stood in the snow, his jaw set, his own wall gaping behind him. The doubters had no words left, but the sky promised more cold to come. That night, the wind howled again, and the settlement braced for the real killing frost. With 3 families sleeping on store floors, Martha Norris spoke the words no one else would.
We can't wait for the mill. Brennan's walls are standing. Let him show us how.
Amos called a meeting outside the store. The whole lane gathered in the snow.
I'll hear him out, but if he leads us wrong, the blame falls on him alone.
I am not here to argue. I have clay and sticks. If you want to learn, I'll teach.
He held up a bucket of clay and a bundle of willow with ease, no sawmill required.
How long would a shelter take, John? Before the next freeze?
3 days, if everyone pitches in.
The meeting broke apart without a decision, but the cold pressed on. By dusk, the sky turned iron gray.
John stood at his window. The killing frost was coming, and this time it would test everything.
The killing frost fell upon the settlement like a hammer of cold, freezing breath before it left the lungs. All through the dark, timber shrieked and popped. A wall in the Carter cabin buckled outward, the sound of ripping wood rolling across the lane.
John sat by the stove, the dog at his feet. The clay walls held the heat like a slow oven. He heard the destruction outside, but the room stayed still.
He fed the fire, listening to the distant crumble of logs giving way. Dawn revealed a world undone. The frost had peeled roofs back like lids and splintered walls into kindling. Cabins gaped open, their families huddled in the snow, breath misting in the cold light. Through the ruins, a single chimney smoked. John's cabin stood whole, its daubed walls blackened by frost, but unbroken.
It's still standing.
Amos stood in the wreckage of his own home. No words left. His silence was heavier than any mockery. The question was no longer whether the mud and twig house would collapse. It was how anyone could survive the winter without it. John opened his door to the freezing lane and did not hesitate.
Bring the children first. the old ones. Come inside, all of you.
They filed into the single room, filling every corner and bench. The walls threw back the heat, and the chill began to leave their bones. Outside, Amos Carter stood alone in the wreckage, his breath a thin cloud.
Amos, come in. There's room. No one's counting wrongs tonight.
Amos entered without a word, his jaw locked. The room closed around him in silence.
We owe you thanks, John Brennan. You built what held, and you are sharing it.
John, the clay that sealed my wall. Could you teach us to build whole houses like yours?
We start tomorrow. Gather willow withes and clay. I'll show you every step.
In the cramped warmth of the mud house, the town's resistance finally cracked, not with surrender, but with a question of survival. At first light, John led Caleb and a handful of men to the willow stand. The cold was bitter, but axes swung.
Cut green, keep it limber. We weave it while the sap's still in the wood.
How tight, John? My patch held, but I don't want a wall that breathes.
Amos stood 30 paces back, arms folded. His eyes tracked the work, but his feet never moved.
You kept this quiet all fall, Brennan. My wife's fingers are black with frost. You could have spared her.
You all laughed when he showed you. He was the fool, not the teacher. Own your sneers, Amos Carter.
We can't change yesterday. Tomorrow we build a new wall, or we freeze. Your choice.
The room fell still, the fire crackled, and no one spoke against the man whose house held them all.
They're scared. Scared men lash out. But I'll get them through this.
Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a strange, dry heat, a warning none of them understood yet. The next morning, a spark caught in the dry timbered cabin at the lane's end. Smoke thickened. Then a window burst into orange flame. The wind snatched the fire and threw it across the settlement. Within minutes, a wall of flame was racing through the dry logs.
Everyone into my cabin. Now.
They stumbled through the snow, dragging children and blankets. John grabbed a bucket of wet clay and began packing it around the doorframe.
Will the clay hold against fire, John?
Clay doesn't burn. It's baked earth. It'll hold, it has to.
Ranger barked at the door, but the flames swept closer, licking at the base of the daubed wall.
The wall, it isn't catching. The fire is sliding over it like water.
The dry, timbered cabins became pyres, but the mud and stick house would not feed the fire. The clay turned hard, then harder, baked by the heat into unyielding stone. Outside, the world burned, but inside, breath still came, and the thin lattice of willow and mud stood between those souls and the inferno. Inside the cabin, the fire's roar was a living thing, pressing against the walls. But the walls did not answer. A thin wisp of smoke bled through a seam near the window. John saw it and moved.
Amos the clay bucket. Bring it here.
Amos hesitated only a heartbeat. Then he lifted the pail and crossed the room. Together, they pressed the wet earth into the gap. Their hands worked side by side, the clay sealing the night's breath.
The children are quiet. The clay is holding back the devil's heat.
Ranger stood at the window, a low growl in his throat as the fire painted the glass in shades of orange and black.
John, if the roof catches, will the clay hold it too?
We'll seal the rafters if we have to. Right now, we keep the air clear.
Outside, the inferno screamed. But inside, the air was breathable, and the mud walls held their heat and their people. A thunderous crack rolled across the lane, another neighbor's roof collapsing into the inferno. John's eyes found the outer wall. The clay was glowing a deep, dangerous red.
The heat is concentrating. If it climbs much higher, the clay could vitrify and crack. I have to cool it down. There's a barrel behind the west wall. I'm going out to wet the daub.
You'll need more than one bucket. I'll go with you.
John grabbed a soaked blanket. Amos filled 2 pails. Together they pushed out into the wall of heat. Ranger charged out behind them, barking through the smoke. John slapped the blanket onto the hot clay while Amos hurled bucket after bucket. Steam burst around them in thick white clouds.
It's cooling. The clay won't shatter now. Keep it coming.
The fire, having consumed all the dry timber nearby, began to dwindle. It had nothing left to eat. They stumbled back inside, coats smoking, faces raw. The cabin's interior was still warm, the air heavy but breathable. The mud and stick house had faced the killing frost and the wildfire, and let the feeling neither had found a way in. Dawn touched the valley, revealing a wasteland of smoldering ashes and collapsed beams. Not a single other roof stood. John Brennan's cabin rose from the ruin, its daubed walls blackened but denying the fire its victory. The chimney still breathed. The survivors pushed open the door and stepped into the cold light, their faces etched with disbelief. No one spoke.
We laughed at you, John. We called it a beaver dam, but it's the only thing standing in this whole valley.
The irony was not lost on anyone. The house they'd mocked had become the only sanctuary.
Lord, you sent us an answer, and we called it a fool's errand. Forgive us for our blindness.
I was wrong, Brennan. Your mud walls they held when mine shattered, I won't forget.
Amos removed his hat and stood bareheaded in the cold, a silence louder than any jeer.
We've got work to do. The frost is still coming, but now we know how to face it, together.
Now, the whole settlement knew there was only one way forward, and it started with mud and willow. The survivors built a makeshift shelter against one wall of John's cabin, tarp stretched over salvaged beams. John stood before them, not to gloat, but to deliver the knowledge that had saved him.
This way is older than the wheel. It's sheltered families across every continent for thousands of years.
The listeners leaned in, their faces reflecting a hard-won humility.
Green sticks woven tight, then packed with clay and straw. It breathes but doesn't burn. It holds the heat like a kiln.
John, I'd be obliged if you'd teach me first. My hands are ready, and my pride's been burned out of me.
John looked at him for a long moment, then pressed a bundle of green with Ez into Amos Carter's upturned palms.
We'll need a wall by week's end. The frost won't wait for anyone.
Ranger rested his head on a daubed panel, his tail giving one slow thump, as if to say the long fight was over. For the first time since the first snow, the lane felt less like a grave and more like the start of something new. By daybreak, every able hand was in the willow stand. Axes flashed and bundles of green with Iz piled high.
Weave them tight, no bigger than a finger's width. The mud needs something to grip.
We'll bring the straw and carry the water. Just show us where the clay trough goes.
They set the troughs near the creek. Every family had a task, and no one stood idle.
The daub sets faster when the straw's chopped fine. I see that now, John. Keeps the wall from cracking.
Panel by panel, the new skeletons rose from the ash, frames of green willow, sturdy and true.
Cut a small window here. Leave a shelf for the lantern. A daubed home can still have light.
3 walls up in 2 days. We'll have a roof on by Sunday, if the weather holds.
The sound of hammering and the wet slap of clay filled the air. Laughter returned to the lane. The cold still pressed, but they had a weapon now, and they were building it together. The new walls stood sealed and dry, their chimneys breathing smoke into the pale winter sky.
Before we light the first fire, you should know what's in these walls.
He told them of his grandfather, who learned it from his father, and of the generations before who carried the secret across continents.
It sheltered the first farmers, the Roman legions, villages in Africa and Asia, thousands of years before any sawmill turned a blade.
Martha wiped her eyes. Caleb stood a little straighter. Even Amos bowed his head.
We called it primitive. We laughed, but it was stronger than our pride, stronger than a frost, stronger than the fire.
The dog rose and licked John's hand, as if to affirm the truth.
This is our way now. Build with it, live in it, and never let the memory of this winter fade.
The rebuilt settlement stood under the iron sky, each wall a testament to the wisdom that had outlasted empires. And on the wall of the first cabin, the clay was warm to the touch, ancient, unbroken, and full of promise. Winter returned, but this time the snow fell on walls that held the heat. Every chimney on the lane breathed smoke. John walked the lane with Ranger at his heel, and neighbors raised their hands from every doorway.
Brennan, get in here before the stew cools. We saved you a seat.
Smells like home. Amos. I won't turn that down. John pressed his palm to the daubed wall. Warm, still, solid. The same wall they'd laughed at, now saving their lives.
Around the table sat the families who had once called him a fool. Now they broke bread in the house his wisdom had built. He looked out the window at the lane of new cabins. The mockery was buried under the snow.
The arrow my granddad passed down. It pointed true all along. We just had to listen.
That winter, the wattle and daub walls held the heat, the memories and the hope of a town reborn. What was once a target of mockery had become the standard. The ancient method had not only survived, it had triumphed. Spring came to the valley. The snow melted, and the daubed walls stood dark and solid against the green. Green shoots pushed through the earth where ash had fallen, and the cabins breathed with open windows. John stood on a low rise with Ranger, looking over the homes that had risen from the ruin. A child ran past a daubed wall, laughing. The walls that had been mocked were now just part of the landscape.
No one speaks of the mockery now. They only remember the man who taught them to build from the earth. He smiled, a quiet satisfaction. The old way had found its home.
Then he turned and walked back toward his own cabin, the dog padding quietly beside him.
The mud walls were just home now. That was enough.
With the settlement stretched below, smoke curling from chimneys, the daubed walls warm in the spring sun, and the ancient method, older than the wheel, had become the heartbeat of a town that would never forget. Years passed, but the people of the valley would never forget the winter. Their mud and twig house saved them all. On a warm spring afternoon, John Brennan stood beside his cabin wall. His work long finished, he placed both hands on the sun-warmed clay, the texture of the straw and earth visible under his fingers. From the hilltop, with Ranger at his side, he looked over the homes that had risen from the ash. The wattle and daub had sheltered humanity, since before men had words to mock it, before kingdoms rose and before the wheel was carved. It was already old in this forgotten valley. It had faced the killing frost and the wildfire, and it had held. It asked no praise. It simply stood, dark and solid under the endless sky. The village below was alive with children and smoke, the walls now just a part of the land. And as the sun sank, the ancient clay on John's palm glowed, silent, eternal, and already waiting for the next winter.